In the post-board games, the blue deck converts into, tries to get away from the fast tempo draws and tries to outgrind the blue-white control deck. But the presence of Archangel of Doom definitely changes how the dynamic of the matchup plays out.
All right, so we see Dylan Donegan starting off on the play. It's a island, but no one drop, and just a tap land from Brad. And we'll see the first play of the game is Dylan's Tidebinder Mage. We see in his hand a couple more lands. Looks like he does have Thassa at the very least. So not a quick aggro start, but some of those more powerful cards certainly in the opener.
And Brad's list with 3 main deck copies of Syncopate, so Brad might be put to the test right away by this Thassa.
Yeah, if he doesn't have the counter spells, this could be a tough match for him, or a tough game at the very least. Dylan does have a turn 3 Thassa along with the turn 4 Bident, 2 of the strongest cards in the matchup. And certainly if Dylan can steal a game 1, it'd be a huge feather in his cap here.
Yeah. Brad having to win a game on the draw in the post-board games can be pretty challenging, so.
Yeah, now that's just as you said, Syncopate was cast for Brad, so Thassa did not resolve. Dylan left with just Tidebinder Mage, was able to hit in for 2, but so far the board is being kept relatively clear of the cards that Brad can't beat.
Yeah, and if Dylan's just playing random creatures to the board, Brad's going to be just fine. It's the card advantage and the grindier cards that Brad has to be concerned with, like Bident, like Thassa, Jace potentially, and so, these kind of starts from Dylan where Brad's able to fend off the real sources of card advantage. It's going exactly the way that Brad would want to set this up.
All right, so Dylan has the option to try for Bident, but instead he goes with Frostburn Weird in his hand. He has the 4th land. Pretty successful. Brad does have a Syncopate in hand, so he is playing around the spell as he should be, but it will get dissolved.
A lot of counter spells in this blue-white list. Multiple Syncopates and multiple dissolves.
All right, so going back to Brad, we see in his hand pretty much all the tools he wants to have. He has Azorius Charm and Detention Sphere, along with another copy of Syncopate and plenty of lands.
Yeah. And Brad happy to play a very passive game here, just as long as Dylan isn't able to resolve one of his really threatening cards, Brad can take these lumps and eventually handle this Tidebinder Mage.
Yeah, so Bident of Thassa, now tried out by Dylan, it will probably also meet a counter spell.
Well, Brad also has the option of Azorius Charming the attacker and the Detention Sphere in the following turn. He is going to use a Syncopate, but he doesn't even necessarily have to counterspell that.
Yeah, I do like the use Syncopates. We see the remaining card in Dylan's hand is a Cyclonic Rift. So had he gone for the Detention Sphere play, it would have given Dylan at least 1 turn to rescue the Bident and get a card off it.
And you see Brad using all of his mana that turn on Syncopate and Azorius Charm. All this was to set up a stable board to resolve Jace.
Yeah. Now that he knows Dylan will only be drawing a Tidebinder Mage next turn, there's not much to fear. He casts Jace, -2 it, and sees Sphinx's Revelation, among other things in the cards.
No Mutavault in play to threaten this Jace, and again, no threatening draw step coming next turn as well.
Yeah, and we are only on turn 4, but Brad already with a commanding presence on the board. Dylan puts the Revelation by itself, and things are good for the control player when he doesn't even have to take the Revelation.
Yeah, I mean, this is surgical. There's no other way to describe this. There's nothing wrong with Dylan's draw here, but Brad just able to keep pace the whole way, and now we're at the stage of the game where Brad can really start taking advantage with his powerful spells.
Yeah, well, game 1, Dylan has to just present a good curve and kind of challenge Brad to be able to answer it. And Brad has really risen to the challenge here with, answer at every step of the way.
And so now Dylan with a Cyclonic Rift plus his draw step, which was a Mutavault.
Oh yeah, Mutavault in the play. That is land number 7 also for Dylan.
It does allow him to overload Cyclonic Rift, but the game's not really about that sort of thing. It's about trying to race Brad's card advantage, and right now, Dylan's really struggling.
All right, so another minus from the Jace. That's the second activation. He sees Mutavault, Temple of Silence, and Supreme Verdict. And those will be split once again. Supreme Verdict's a really good card against Mono Blue in general. Dylan with only 1 card in hand, already pretty much on the back foot here. The Mutavault he has in play is really the only threat he has remaining.
And Brad also had a healthy 16 life.
Right. Yeah, and it seems like Dylan is a little checked out of the game already, and I think reasonably so. He doesn't, what draws is he even looking for at this point? It seems like Brad really is just assembled control.
Yeah, I think we kind of have reached the stage where it's not clear if Dylan can win even if he was allowed to stack his deck. I mean, it has gotten to that point.
All right, well, he will give it a shot. He's debating how to split these here. You know, what strategically I think he's trying to do is say, all right, if Brad's hand's really bad, what could he be looking for? What can I?
Right.
Yeah. What can I give him to not ensure that he just has what he needs?
Assuming he finds nothing relevant for a long time, what's my path?
Yeah. And it turns out he certainly does have something that's relevant. His turn 6 play is going to be Elspeth, Sun's champion. He immediately pluses it, making 3 soldiers. That should be enough to carry home the game.
I mean, Dylan does get to reset the board at some point with the Cyclonic Rift, but that's not a long-term solution.
Right. Yeah, he does have the Cyclonic Rift remaining in his hand. He could do that now, I suppose. But there's still the problem that Brad has a detention sphere in hand, so whatever card Dylan gets to top deck and cast will be taken care of.
Yeah.
Elspeth will come back. Jace will come back.
Sphinx's Revelation is still an issue here.
Right. And he's going to go ahead and make the play. All right, the end step Cyclonic Rift does happen. He gets 1 chance to resolve a spell, and it's going to be Master of Waves. So that will create 1 elemental cohort. He can get an attack in with Mutavault, but the Master, I mean, even just the Elspeth recast should be enough to answer Master of Waves.
Yeah, this is, again, these are not long-term solutions to the problem that Dylan is facing right now.
All right, and Brad does exactly that. Recasts Elspeth, pluses it, passes back the turn. 3 soldier tokens once again in play, and Dylan without a profitable attack. Suppose, yeah, so on the stack the deck mode, he'd want what? A Thassa here? That would be the next best play. Now then he can start putting unblockable things through.
Yep.
So he'd want Thassa, and he'd have to just hope that Brad doesn't have a sphere for it.
Right. Thassa is not a shabby play here, but even then I think Dylan's in a huge hole.
Right.
Keep in mind that the Mutavault is a 3/3 currently because of Master of Waves.
Yeah, it'll take all 3 of the soldier tokens to take it down. But that's a trade that Brad would be more than happy to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Dylan's trying to see if he has a line to play to. We'll see. It looks like he has one of his 2 drops. It's going to be Frostburn Weird, and just passes back the turn. Yeah, we see Supreme Verdict in Brad's hand. He's going to go ahead and start by swinging soldier tokens.
And this is a very, very loud indication that Brad is planning on casting Supreme Verdict this turn.
Absolutely. He hopes that Dylan would activate Mutavault. Looks like it's just going to be the Frostburn Weird taking down 1. Dylan goes to 22, and it will be Supreme Verdict. And that will clear the board free. 3 more soldier tokens from Elspeth, and Brad resets. Still with 2 spheres, a Jace, a Supreme Verdict left in his hand. It's pretty academic here.
Yeah. And he's also aware that that's the only Cyclonic Rift in Dylan's main deck, so he can be pretty comfortable going ultimate with Elspeth next turn.
Yep, so he goes and pluses the Elspeth to get up to 6 tokens. That means the next turn won't be lethal, but, well, no, with Mutavaults, it will be. Master of Waves for Dylan. Pass, and Brad's going to Revelation, and that's really enough for Dylan. Okay.
Yeah.
So game 1 in the books for Brad Nelson. He's up 1-0 against Mono Blue. Winning the game 1 as he should, but the real challenge will come in when he tries to get his second game.
Yeah, Dylan gets to convert his deck a little bit into something a little less susceptible to Brad's primary game plan. Welcome back to the booth. Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, Star City Games Standard Open. Here in Baltimore, we're in the quarterfinals right now where Brad Nelson's up a game. Before we delve into the sideboard, it is trivia time. For those of you who are not familiar with our coverage, during the elimination rounds of both our Standard and Legacy Open, we give away 3, then 6, then a full year of Star City Games Premium. The way the contest works is either myself or Matthias will ask a question. You will tweet that answer at SCG Live and hashtag SCG Premium. Of the correct answers, one will be drawn at random. It is not about the first person to answer correctly, so feel free to look this up and answer at your relative leisure. And of those answers, one will be drawn for 3 free months. And that question is, Brad Nelson's blue-white control deck, inspired very heavily, obviously, by Tomohiro Saito, plays exactly 1 creature in the main deck. Name that creature. Again, tweet your answer at SCG Live and hashtag SCG Premium. One of you will be drawn for a 3-month sampling of Star City Games premium content.
All right, excellent. So let's go ahead and move to the sideboard. We're giving a lot of attention to the fact that this matchup changes after board, and it certainly changes in the favor of Dylan Donegan. So normally this is a matchup which the aggro deck of blue becomes an aggro control deck. You see them board out really all their creatures that can't stand alone. They would board out cards like Cloud Fin Raptor, like Tidebinder Mage, and some number of even Master Waves, as he just gets answered. And they board in just all the counter spells possible. Dispel, Dissolve, Gainsay, another Bident of Thassa, another Jace, even an Aetherling is something that Dylan would be interested in this matchup.
Yeah, and all of this is an attempt to reduce his exposure to Supreme Verdict. The more card advantage oriented he can become, the more counterspell oriented he become, and the less just of a beatdown deck he can become, he gives himself a better shot against Brad's, litany of answers and removal and sweepers. On the other side, you see Brad with a pretty powerful and straightforward sideboard. He can bring in 3 copies of Gainsay, of course, excellent against Dylan's all-blue spell deck. 4 copies of Archangel of Doom. We've talked about this at length during the broadcast. This allows Brad, if Dylan's trying to play a slower game where he's trying to build up his board and his cards in hand incrementally, Archangel can be just too fast for that kind of game plan.
Yeah, it's interesting how Brad adapts his deck to the matchup. Because he's playing, so classically when you have aggro versus aggro control, control versus aggro control, counterspells in the control deck become very weak. Really because the aggro control deck is always the one putting on the pressure, so it's always actually the control deck that has to tap out, and the aggro control deck that starts countering things, which is why the matchup is pretty good for Dylan. You'll see Brad, what he's actually doing is he size in better things to tap out for, which like the 4 Archangel of Thune. Usually what I'll see him board out is almost all the counter spells that he has. Syncopate, Dissolve, he usually doesn't actually, those are great when he's ahead, but the challenge of the game is for him to get ahead in the first place.
So you don't think there's some argument for keeping in, say, some number of syncopates because he needs to answer Thassa, certainly when he's on the draw. Dylan's going to bring in, additional copies of Bident and Jace. Dylan's converting into a much slower deck himself. There's more of an argument to keeping counterspells in that world.
Yeah, well, you can keep in some. Dissolve certainly isn't what you'd want. You already get to have 3 Gainsay. Gainsay, obviously great against a deck where every card is blue. That's ideal. As far as keeping in cards like Syncopate, he can answer a Thassa with a counterspell sometimes. The problem is going to be that Dylan, it's rare that Dylan just can cast a Thassa. He won't cast an exposed turn 3 Thassa if he doesn't have to. He'll only cast it if he has a Judge's Familiar, in which case the Syncopate doesn't work for it. Otherwise, what he'll do is he'll just play something like a Frostburn Weird and hit Brad with it until Brad taps out for an answer for Frostburn Weird. And when Brad taps out for that sort of answer, that's when Dylan will go ahead and make the Thassa. And in that situation, it's not even clear that a Syncopate is a counterspell.
On the other side of the bracket, Thomas Schlegel up a game. Again, he's playing Red-Green Devotion against Mono-Red Splash White for Chain of the Rocks Devotion. Breaking serve in that matchup, really important as both decks have minimal paths to interaction in game 1.
Yeah, it really is just both players almost trying to not draw the other one.
Yeah. 2 ships passing in the night.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the thing is you still have to remember that Dylan is an aggro deck at the end of the day. So there's a lot of cards that Brad can't really afford to set out. Cards like Azorius Charm, like Last Breath, Detention Sphere, these are things he still actually needs in his deck in the matchup.
If you see that little numeral 3 next to Brad Nelson, that means 3rd place in the current Season 1 standings. Not only is the prestige of an open win and the money associated with it on the line for Brad here, he's still within striking distance of receiving that Season 1 point invite. So very important elimination rounds for Brad. Not that the other players don't have things on the line as well, but securing one of those first of 16 invites to the Players' Championship at the end of the year, a big deal.
Yeah, so we have, all right, going on to game 2, we'll put Dylan on the play again. What'll be key for him is to just to land 1 threat, really. He just continues to make 1 threat and play Protect the Threat and hope to run Brad out that way. And what's curious is whether or not having 4 Archangel of Thunes changes that strategy. And that's really the innovation of the Saito blue-white deck, is that he kind of breaks instead of trying to answer all of Dylan's threats, he just plays a really large threat of his own that actually Dylan has trouble answering.
Yeah, it's, like you said, if Dylan's plan is one threat a turn, play this slow game, try to hit you with Mutavault here and there and resolve my 4-mana spells. If Dylan's board is not advanced when Archangel comes down, if Dylan doesn't have an answer on the spot, that's, it's too late for him to catch back up by deploying his hand.
Yeah, and I mean, the classic thing that you would do here with the blue deck is, you just make priority number 1 to never let Sphinx's Revelation resolve. Mm-hmm. Just sit back on counterspells. You have, 7 of them post-board. But you're right, he has to, the fact that Brad has 4 Archangels forces Dylan to do things like keep in rapid hybridization, which can be pretty awkward against a deck where that's its only creature.
Do you think there's any argument for domestication?
Well, domestication, I think
it's the greediest of the options.
It's the greediest of the options. The problem is you can't top deck it either. If the Archangel has Brad can do something like just have, last breath his own guy in response to domestication, and then the domestication doesn't work. We do see turn 1, Judge's Familiar from Dylan. This can be pretty scary for Brad, as if Dylan has Familiar into Thassa, there actually isn't an answer in Brad's deck for that.
Yeah, off to a good start here, and Judge's Familiar definitely throws off the pacing of the game.
All right, so Familiar, Frostburn Root will be the second card. Brad with no play on turn 2, and we'll see if Dylan can curve into that, the 3-mana god for his deck.
Looks like he's kept a fairly land-heavy hand.
Yeah, we see Gainsay, we see Night Veil Spectre. He can push some damage. I don't think he wants to commit any more to the board right now. He certainly doesn't want to lose to a Supreme Verdict.
Yeah, if that's the game plan here, there seems like a pretty strong argument to pump all of the mana into the Weird. Feels a little early to me to be leaving up Gainsay, but we'll see what Dylan wants to do.
Well, there's no real 3-mana spell that you have to have resolve. It's just Jace is where you have to start countering stuff. So
yeah, I think Dylan's probably fine if Brad uses a Detention Sphere here and trades 1 for 1.
Brad taps out. It gives Dylan an opening to resolve a different threat. He could play a Night Veil, for example, and that would be fine. He does manage to get 5 damage in on turn 3, and that's going to put Brad to 14. Brad just with a 3rd land. And it's another bird, it looks like, drawn for Dylan. And yeah, I would expect to not see Dylan play another spell for a while. Mm-hmm. We see this swing. Go ahead, and now it's just a pump of 2. Now the Gainsay is being left up with respect to Jace.
This is a lot of pressure.
Yeah, that Frostburn Weird is actually really good in the post-board games. It's a 4-1 for 2. Because unlike some of Brad's counterspells, like Syncopate, Dylan's counterspells aren't mana intensive. They cost 1 and cost 2.
Weird seems really critical to the post-board plan you're talking about. This is Tiebinder Mage here. Brad has a lot more time to set up shop.
Right, and I think that's why, that's why Weirds are kept in. They're a really good chip away at your opponent card. And you see Brad already down to 10 on turn 4. So this is a fast enough clock. We'll kill him on about turn 6. You see his hand 2 Syncopates. Sphinx's Revelation, Supreme Verdict. And this is what I was getting at, where Syncopate is fine, but it's still not great in the matchup. The control deck really can't be the one sitting back on counterspells. Like, the player who's ahead is the one who wants counterspells, and that's rarely going to be Brad. And more lands for Dylan is becoming somewhat difficult for him here.
Yeah, I mean, Brad's setting up a Supreme Verdict for next turn. It's really important for Dylan to have a good follow-up to that.
Right.
And if it's just Judge's Familiar or something along those lines, Brad might be able to overpower it.
Yeah, I think his best follow-up at the moment is Night Veil Spectre, which isn't bad, but not great. All right, 3 pumps. That puts Brad down to 5. Next turn is a lethal swing. So Brad's going to have to make a move. Yep. And it has to be a non-blue move, because we know that Dylan has that Gainsay.
And the upside of Dylan making all these land drops, at least, is...
Yeah. And the cheeky play of, all right, Judge's Familiar, your Supreme Verdict, and Brad declines to pay.
Making all these land drops does have at least the upside of doing a good job of making Dylan not care about these Syncopes very much.
All right, so Dylan casts out 2 more creatures again. It's Judge's Familiar and Night Veil Spectre. This challenges Brad to have yet another Supreme Verdict. And a little bit, I think this is 1 creature too many from Dylan almost. Brad's going to go ahead and Detention Sphere, and now Gainsay and Syncopate both happen. The Detention Sphere is going to resolve
You know, he's going to fight over the syncope with the judge's familiar.
Yep.
So Night Vale's Spectre triggers another land.
Yeah. Yeah, so Judge's Familiar there does mean that, yeah, he had to kill the 1/1, not the 2/3. And Frostburn Weird. Dylan commits another creature. I'm not sure how much of a fan. Well, I guess since he doesn't have a Gainsay to sit back on, maybe that's what he has to be doing.
Yeah. Too many things go wrong here. Another update here in our 1-8 matchup. Justin defeats Joel 2-1, as you predicted. Mono Black very good against red-green monsters.
Yeah, so our 1 seed falls. It does manage to take a game off the Mono Black deck, but Justin Bransfield and Mono Black is our first player into Sunday's top 4. All right, and we do see right now Detention Sphere on Frostburn Weird, and Brad's going to try to Revelation away the lethal attack there, but it is gainsayed by Dylan, and we move on to game 3.
And that was exactly the recipe that you were talking about in these post-board games here, of getting out a little bit out in front on the board, and then
Just protecting it,
trying to invalidate Brad's counterspells, trying to make it hard for him to resolve cards like Jace that can allow Brad to advance his board, and force Dylan to continue to overextend his Supreme Verdict.
So in one of the most recent PTQs I've been playing in with blue-white, this is certainly a matchup that's been difficult for the blue-white deck, and I'm interested to see, like, once again, what Archangel can do. If you think back through that game, the game's texture certainly can change a lot. If at any point Brad had just tapped 5 lands there and played Archangel of Thune. Remember, all of Dylan's counterspells were gainsays.
Yeah, Dylan would have had a bunch of creatures in play that couldn't brawl with Archangel, and a bunch of gainsays in his hand that can't counter Archangel.
Right, and so Brad just would have started, and actually Brad just would have started hitting him because Archangel would have raced Dylan's entire board. It's a 6-point life swing per turn. Dylan never dealt 6 in a turn. Yeah, so Brad would actually just with 1 creature invalidate Dylan's strategy. And he does have a full set of Archangels, so it's not unreasonable to think that he can do that.
So does the mono blue game plan that you've been talking about, trying to set up little threats and protecting them, how much harder does that become on the draw?
Well, on the draw, you don't get to have the safe turn 3 play. Like I said before, with a turn 1 Judge's Familiar, a turn 3 Thassa is uncounterable. It's still, like, it's better to be on the play, but it's not necessary. The thing is that Brad will still, like, you still get ahead the moment Brad has to Detention Sphere something. If Brad can, what it lets Brad do is he can counter everything on its way down, and if he can do that, use instants. Say, for example, turn 2 Frostburn Weird, okay, turn, end step Last Breath, 3rd land go. If Brad can continue to answer all of Dylan's cards with instants, then Brad's actually ahead, and being on the play has helped him do that. The thing is that if Brad's answers, turn 2 Frostburn Weird, well, okay, turn 3 Detention Sphere, then it's shifted right back to where it would be with Dylan on the play, where suddenly Brad's tapping out for answers as opposed to having mana untapped when he answers.
So a shorthand is the player who feels compelled to tap out is probably the one in trouble.
Right, the player who has to. The thing is that when Dylan taps out, Brad doesn't punish him for it. And when Brad taps out, yeah, but Brad doesn't want to ever get into a spot where he has to start tapping out. If he can prevent himself from getting in that spot, he's fine.
Except for Archangel, of course.
Well, that's what changes it, right? Yeah. It's something that he actually can tap out for. It's interesting. So blue, a lot of times, in the pre-Archangel world, blue would win these post-board games on things like turn 14. Something like 10 hits with a Tidebinder Mage, and Brad trying to Revelation. The blue deck would try to Revelation, and they just counter it. And eventually, you just flood out and lose. It would be these really strange games. But yeah, Archangel just has to change that.
Absolutely. If you're just joining us, we're in the quarterfinals right now of the Star City Games Standard Open here in Baltimore. Dylan Donegan playing Mono Blue Devotion against Brad Nelson, former Player of the Year, Star City Games, premium columnist, 3rd ranked player in our Season 1 standings, one of America's top Magic players, a standard grinder here playing Saito's inspired blue-white control list.
Yeah, both Brad and Todd Anderson were on that deck for the tournament today. Both, I believe, put up pretty significant results with the deck. They were both undefeated late into the tournament. Todd ended up with a top, he ended up in the prize. I believe it was a top 32 finish at the tournament. So Todd doing very well also.
In our Devotion semi-mirror over in the 3-6 bracket, Meru has tied it up 1-1, so he will be going to a Game 3 with Thomas.
Yeah, now if this match finishes first and Meru and Thomas are still playing, we will move over to that match.
Yeah, that is our backup feature. So Game 3 about to get underway here.
All right, both players on 7 cards. So we will go ahead and remember, Brad, like I said before, it's on the play here. That's good for him. It means that if cards like Syncopate can become better when you're on the play, he still needs to fire off the Syncopate at basically the first thing Dylan plays. Because as we saw in that last game, once you get past that, once you get behind on the board, the Syncopates don't become cards anymore. Brad really hardly had the chance to cast one for any effect.
Welcome back to the booth. Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, Brad Nelson taking a quick little pit stop before the third game gets underway here. You saw his opponent Dylan about to take a mulligan. And to me, in a theoretical sense, the way you're describing the mono-blue matchup and its game plan post-board against decks like blue-white, against decks like Esper, it feels like it just has to get substantially worse when they're on the draw.
Yeah, and it certainly does. It's a tempo deck, right? So being on the play is always advantageous for the deck. Sometimes, because Brad can't sculpt what kind of answers he has, like I said, if he has the sorcery speed answers, the verdicts and the detention spheres, then it's still fine for blue. They'll get that tempo advantage. The one land won't be so important. The bigger thing is if Brad can answer everything at instant speed, then the plan doesn't work very well.
And Brad also making land drops feels like a critical piece of this puzzle as well.
Right.
So he has to threaten Dylan with his own threatening stuff at some points. Otherwise, Dylan can, add to the board one turn and plan on leaving Gainsay up the following turn, or dissolve rather the following turn.
The thing is that there are still ways that Brad, even if both players just play lands for a while, Dylan can do things to somewhat invalidate Brad's removal. Say if he can play a Frostburn Weird with mana up, suddenly you can't Last Breath it anymore. He can still make plays that eventually force Brad to tap out on his own turn to answer things.
Yes.
So it's relevant that Brad could finally put a clock on the matchup, because I think without that clock, the Devotion player can really play the match patiently. As long as he just doesn't let the Revelation player Revelation, then he's pretty fine.
As we come back to the booth here, Brad shuffling his opponent's deck. Again, Dylan taking a mulligan here. Brad's kept 7. About to get this Game 3 underway.
All right. So, underway, Brad on the play. And we are underway. Brad starts off on a Hollowed Fountain, and we will see the start that Dylan has. Looks like he does have some number of Thassa in his opening hand. That doesn't want to be the first thing he taps out for, but... All right, second land from Brad, and then this will be a turn 2 Judge's Familiar from Dylan.
Not as good as it would be on the first turn, but still critical for Dylan to get something on the board.
You see, Brad has Last Breath in his hand, and the thing is, because what we were saying before, Brad probably will should be end step Last Breathing this. Or I found the matchup that as awful as that is, you don't want to play a removal spell in Judge's Familiar. Playing around Judge's Familiar is actually really difficult too. You see a tap land from Brad. This means that a Thassa that Dylan plays is just safe once again.
Yeah. It's possible Brad's planning on last breathing anyway and hoping that the Judge's Familiar informs some decision on Dylan's part.
Right. So Judge's Familiar hits in. Brad goes down to 19, a third land, and Thassa, God of the Sea, comes out from Dylan. And that it's Gainsay proof thanks to Judge's Familiar. It is not, however, Detention Sphere proof. So you see that's what Brad does have.
And this is a big opening for Brad here to resolve something like Jace.
Yeah, so he went with the Last Breath there on end step. Right, and he can resolve Jace, or he can resolve Detention Sphere. He's going to go ahead and go with Jace.
Yeah, it feels like it's really important for Brad to use his mana efficiently because he's playing around these different counterspells.
Yeah, his worry here is that if Dylan resolves his own Jace now, Dylan's Jace is better than Brad's Jace.
Yep.
Dylan does have a 4-drop to resolve. I believe it's only Bident, which is, to be fair, still pretty problematic.
But Brad's got to be pretty happy with Dylan spending 2 turns, basically taking 2 turns off of actually threatening him, allowing Brad to resolve things, to start making his land drops and try to push back past Dylan's counterspells.
Well, the fact that this Jace gets to hang out for a while is really good for Dylan. It's really good for Brad. The fact that Dylan doesn't, say just have a Mutavault in play. One Mutavault will be enough to make this a really difficult situation for Brad.
Mm-hmm.
And Bident of Thassa is made by Dylan. Brad will, fortunately, get to Detention Sphere it. And the Jace sticking around is huge.
Yeah. Feels like it gives Brad a lot of control over the way the game gets played and forces Dylan to be more proactive in playing to the board than perhaps he would like.
All right, well, Detention Sphere will hit Thassa. And Mutavault will swing for 2 for Brad. Not even a representation of a Gainsay.
Well, I think he's trying to just goad Dylan into just playing further and further into Supreme Verdict.
Sure, Dylan with his draw for the turn. A turn too late, he draws a Jace Architect of Thought. It'll still be good here, but not as good yet. And thanks to Mutavault, this is a pretty awkward Jace for Dylan. He either has to plus it and lose it to a possible Detention Sphere, or minus it and lose it to a Mutavault. He's going to go for the plus and hope Brad doesn't have the Detention Sphere, but as we know, that's not the case.
Yeah, it's curious how many of these games, the difference between one of these players having Mutavault and not having it makes the entire texture of the game different.
Yeah, for the one, consolation for Dylan is that if Brad does Detention Sphere, he will lose his own Jace in the process. See, Gainsay, Last Breath, Detention Sphere, a pretty good -2 for the Jace. And if I'm Dylan here, I think the Gainsay goes by itself. That's probably the strongest card against him.
Yeah, Brad's making enough land drops here where he's going to be able to start doing things and leaving mana up, which makes Gainsay especially threatening.
Yeah, Gainsay, just Counterspell in this matchup, which, as we know, is a pretty strong card. And Brad, I think, is going to get a free Last Breath out of the deal. And he does. He goes and takes that because, as we know, Brad already has a Detention Sphere.
And Brad's in this weird spot where he's actually kind of compelled to resolve things on his turn when Dylan's shields are down, even if it isn't the most efficient thing to be doing.
Yeah, fortunately for Brad, he's not under pressure from any creatures. And Brad will Detention Sphere both Jaces.
And I think he's happy to say, with the removal I have and the counterspells I have, and the top of my deck is just better than yours from here. Let's, I don't need to hang on to this Jace. Let's play my draws against yours.
Yeah, and it's still so fortunate for Brad that there's not a Mutavault on Dylan's side. Mutavault plus Bident is such a threat, but that's not going to do anything. Brad takes to the offensive with his own Mutavault hit.
And this is the problem when you switch into this aggro control deck. You have less pressure in the deck, so you get to these spots where when you're behind the control deck, you're drawing potentially more and more reactive cards.
Yeah, Frostburn Weird's actually a pretty good draw from Dylan here. Remember, Brad hasn't answered the Bident yet, and he may just have to counterspell this Frostburn Weird. It looks like he might just pair up Supreme Verdict with it.
I think he wants to fight over Bident, because Bident's a much bigger long-term issue that Brad has to deal with. Every draw step from Dylan that's a creature, Brad's compelled to respond in some way.
Yeah, to a point that's true. The thing is he can't just, he doesn't have a way to fight over Bident right now.
Yeah.
All right, and Brad deciding whether or not he wants Frostburn Weird to resolve. He does have both a Gainsay and a Dissolve in his hand. And yeah, he's going to have to dissolve Frostburn Weird. And this is the amusing part. Such an innocuous card at 1/4, it's going to get dissolved. And the best part is Dylan's probably going to fight over it.
Yeah. Well, he can't save it for just the big stuff, because if Dylan doesn't actually apply any meaningful pressure, Brad can wait all day.
Right. And well, the thing is, Dylan knows there's a Gainsay in Brad's hand. He knows that he'll lose this counter war. So he may want to save a counterspell for the counter war that he thinks he can win.
But the pacing of this game is so much in Brad's favor.
Absolutely. The fact that Dylan, and it's just that minor thing, I think it goes down to the fact that that Dylan didn't have a Mutavault, really.
You see Brad scry and keep on top. It appears that he left Syncopate on top of his deck, so.
Yep, another counterspell.
He has such a substantial mana advantage at this point that.
Yeah, he is. It is 6 lands for Dylan. Brad is on 8. So he can press the mana advantage, as you mentioned. You see here, it's going to be a 1 mana. It's Judge's Familiar from Dylan. And that will get last breathed. Yeah, Brad is in the situation where he has to answer every creature that Dylan plays.
Yeah.
Fortunately for Brad, he probably can do it.
At least for a while. And, he still potentially can draw and set up a big revelation. The Archangel Thune would be very good here.
Yeah.
So.
That's where Archangel's good. So without Archangel, you'd be in the situation you'd be like, how can Brad lose from here, right? And it would actually be, Brad would have to answer every creature, and eventually he would just run out of answers. And as long as Dylan never lets Brad resolve a revelation, he would be fine. Like I said, Archangel does turn that on its head a little bit. And Tidebinder Mage, now the play for Dylan. And that too will meet a last breath. So Brad's doing a good job of pairing removal spells with their best targets.
And Brad has just drawn a revelation, which I don't think he's going to really want to run out there just yet. But if Dylan ever tries to fight a counter war over something, you might see some real fireworks.
Yeah, and he probably will here. Brad's going to go ahead and try for Jace. And I think that will start the counter war.
Yeah.
Can't actually let that one resolve. As Brad will never let it go away. He'll just minus plus, minus plus, minus plus plus. And Dissolve hits Jace, and Brad will go ahead and gainsay the Dissolve. And that will be dispelled. And Brad actually can't counter back.
Yep.
Dylan will win the counter war.
But now he's getting to the spot now where all he's trying to do is get to a big revelation.
Yeah, I mean, it helps Brad that he kept, we were talking about counter spells in the matchup. It helps that he kept in the counter spells because he's gotten ahead now. They're very good.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, I think, from the blue eye side, different theories on how to board for the matchup, whether or not, counter spells are great. When you get ahead, they help you close out the game. When you're behind, though, they're very bad.
And you see that Dylan has brought in the Aetherling.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Aetherling's
all part of this.
All part of this plan.
Yeah.
He doesn't have enough lands to resolve the Aetherling. Yeah, his Dissolve let him scry. He scried one to the bottom. And a land is drawn. And that can be the undoing of the mono blue deck because he doesn't have a Thassa ticking here. Every time he draws a land, it's pretty much a non-draw for Dylan.
Yeah. I'm curious to see if Dylan's going to go for it.
He's just going to jam.
He might not get a better spot than this.
He's going to, and Brad has it. He
Syncopate
does have
for
a
two.
Syncopate for 2.
Heartbreaking for Dylan is now no cards in hand, shields are down, big revelation
big
time.
Revelation should seal it. The question is if Dylan has another Dispel. No, he only has one in his 75, so that's not going to work.
Yeah. Empty-handed.
And Revelation for 7 cast by Brad Nelson, and that should do it. That was the whole game really jockeying up for this moment, and Brad does resolve the Revelation when he goes for it.
Pretty powerful in a game where both players have traded 1 for 1 for a dozen or so turns to draw 7.
I have to wonder whether or not Brad is boarded in Archangels.
Yeah, maybe the risk of domestication once players know about the deck list is too high.
He's got to have boarded them, and they're for this matchup. This is their best matchup.
Well,
Maybe
again,
not. I mean,
in the
yeah.
elimination rounds, information's public.
Yeah.
How much worse is that plan when your opponent's
to be
informed?
fair, Dylan hasn't boarded in Domestications or Rapids as far as we can tell.
Yep.
So perhaps not. But if he didn't board those out, I don't see. I mean, he's played every other card in his deck. I'm going to go ahead and guess that the Angels are still on the board. And we see Elspeth as the card of choice from Brad. And that should do it.
Yep.
And draw from Dylan and checks his sideboard. Yeah, he has boarded out the Masters and the Raptors. He did not board in any answers to Archangel. Looks like all the Domestications and Rapids are still on the board. And that should be it. We will see if he can put something together. Elspeth 3 turns from going ultimate.
Dylan will gamely play on for a few more turns, but that enormous rev for Brad. And Brad did a really great job in this game of jockeying and setting up the game in such a way to wear down Dylan's shields.
Right. That getting to resolve that Jace on turn 4 and not having it die right away was the play for me that Brad was able to set up for. And we see now a Jace minus. That'll be 2 lands and a Revelation. Brad takes the Revelation, bins the lands, and Dylan knows what's coming, is really unable to stop it. All right. In our other top 8 matches, we have an update. Zach Jesse, number 2 seed, wins 2-0 over Andrew Davis. Zach is another mono black pilot, so both the mono black players into the top at 4. Zach now as the 2 seed is the highest seed remaining in the tournament.
Yeah, and the Esper build was quite hateful as an Esper build can realistically be against mono black game 1, but mono black still takes down the match.
So that means the winner of this match will go on to play mono black tomorrow morning. And yeah,
for Brad, we're talking a lot about how much the points matter. A top 4 finish is worth 10. A finals appearance is worth 15. Winning the whole tournament is 20. That puts him right in striking distance of first place.
Yeah, he's currently 30 points behind William Jensen in the standings, so he can't claim first in this Open. However, if you pair something like 2 finals appearances or a win in a top 4, he could even go as far as to tie Huey this weekend.
Could be, yeah. With this performance here in a Legacy, a good performance in the Legacy Open, you might see Brad take over first.
All right.
Brad Nelson wins 2-1 over Dylan Donegan, advancing to the semifinals.
Yeah, and with one more win tomorrow morning, Brad will actually move into second place. He will pass Brian Braun-Duin if he's able to take the top 4 match tomorrow.